Okay, you can't really talk about the preface to a book without talking about the book itself. So once again, kind of comparing these Book of Commandments, this small little guy here, and then you have the Doctrine and Covenants. The Book of Commandments was really not used much, and the reasons are this. So, in the and again, referring to the Joseph Smith papers on this one, there's a lot of stories about this. I just wanted to read what we had here in the introduction about what we call the fate of the Book of Commandments. So I'm reading here from Joseph Smith papers, Revelations, Book 1, in the historical introduction, and it says this. What proved to be the final known communication from church headquarters in Ohio to the printers in Missouri regarding the printing of the Book of Commandments was given on the 2nd of July, 1833. On that date, in response to a letter of 7th of June, so that's a month ago, that is no longer extant, Joseph Smith and counselors Sidney Rigdon and Frederick G. Williams sent instructions for shipping copies of the Book of Commandments to Kirtland. By the time that letter could reach Independence, the printing project had come to an abrupt end. On the 20th of July, 1833, a group of 400 or 500 Missouri vigilantes stormed the printing office, destroyed or confiscated much of the contents, and halted the printing of not only the Book of Commandments, but of all Mormon publications in Independence. According to claims Phelps and Cowdery made in a lawsuit filed against several dozen of the vigilantes early the following year, the mob, quote, forced open the door to the print shop, tore down the same, forced and tore off the roof of said printing office, forced and tore down the walls of the same, and then and there totally and wholly demolished, tore down, and destroyed the said printing office. So just pausing here for a second, that is you don't just run in and run out. I mean, tearing a roof off, tearing the walls down, tearing a door off the hinges. I mean, they spent some time on this. So just kind of to give a sense, that's why we don't really have a lot of Book of Commandments in our possession. And also, I may add, why this book is interrupted at the end. They took the gatherings that they could and published them into these little guys here. And that's all you get. There's really not a whole lot of them left. But yes, a mob of men stormed this printing office, tore down the walls, tore off the roof. I mean, they really went to town on this thing. So proceeding with the introduction here, it says, furthermore, the Missourians, quote, seized, tore down, and forcibly took and carried away, and converted to the said defendant's own use, a certain printing press of the plaintiffs, then and there, set up and in use in the said printing office. Phelps and Cowdery valued the printing office at $3,000 and the press at $500. So I did what any good historian would do, since I'm an amateur at this, and I just Googled what would that cost in today's dollars. So printing office, $3,000. In today's money, that's $109,676.07. So almost $110,000 is what the printing office cost. The press, $500. In today's money, that would be $18,279.35. Don't quote me on that too much, because if you're listening to this 2 years from now, it's probably changed. But call it 20 grand. So about $130,000 worth of damage in today's terms. The assailants gave the press, which had apparently been pushed out of the second-story window and damaged in the fall, to Robert Kelly and William Davis, who used it beginning in early January 1834 to publish a newspaper in Liberty, Missouri, titled the Upper Missouri Enquirer. So what happened to the press? Well, it looks like one of them they stole, and the other one they launched out of the second floor window, and yeah, it busted when it fell. I should also mention here some terms that we don't really use anymore, or maybe we do. I'm not a professional printer, but you had the press itself, which was sort of the surface that you would smash the thing onto and ink it and all that kind of stuff. But then you had something called the furniture. Now, the furniture in a printing press means the letters. It means the other tools that were a part of it. All that was launched out of the second floor window. Now, this stuff was made of metal, and so it sounds like somebody went back and picked through the dirt and found all the letters and whatnot, and they were actually able to print a newspaper out of the same press. So just to give you kind of a sense of what this is, it's not like the thing broke and there's one thing to think about. In fact, as a little trivia, if you're wondering where lowercase and uppercase letters came from, the lowercase of furniture had all the lowercase letters in it, and then there was an uppercase above it, which had all the capital letters in that. So all that thrown out the window. So yeah, that's a little bit about why this original publication ended. And as far as I know, that's really like the last time they ever printed anything out of that office, because it was just completely torn down. So moving on, several Latter-day Saints were able to save sheets of the unbound Book of Commandments, and copies were later individually bound for private use. It is unclear how many copies were saved and bound, but fewer than 3 dozen are currently known to exist. Also unclear is how those who saved the sheets from the attackers were able to salvage sheets from all 5 gatherings. Inside the print shop, each sheet would have been placed in an uncollated stack, with 1 stack for each gathering. Each sheet would have been placed, meaning that the salvagers would have had to hurriedly gather a sample from each of the stacks after the stacks were thrown from the printing shop. If the process of folding and collating the sheets had already begun, however, it would have been easier to collect all 5 sheets. So there's a possibility that that's true. And if you know the story of that, there was a small number of young women who grabbed whatever papers that they could, went into a nearby field, and sort of put them on the ground and laid on top of them. And that's more or less why we have the Book of Commandments even to this day. So that's how those were saved. So when they talk about several Latter-day Saints, the famous story is that a couple of young women saved them. And that is a favorite story in Latter-day Saint history. John Whitmer's Daybook documents that he sold 6 copies of the Book of Commandments to various individuals for 25 cents each. Whether official agents were appointed to sell copies is unknown, but it appears church leaders gathered known copies and distributed them. The scarcity of the volume likely contributed to church leaders' prompt renewal of the interest in printing a compilations of Revelations, an objective that would not be realized until the 1835 publication of the Doctrine and Covenants in Kirtland, Ohio. So this little book, more or less, is sort of a very rare and special edition. That's why mine is just a replica. So people who have these, there's about 3 dozen left over. And that's why we don't really have this. And so in the preface of section 1, you will see the term Book of Commandments, and that's what it's referring to. After that, we took those commandments, made them the covenants of the Doctrine and Covenants. Again, the doctrine of the Doctrine and Covenants was a series of lectures on faith. And then when you got to part 2, that's when you got into the sections, as we call them today, of the Doctrine and Covenants. They were first called sections in the 1835 edition, and that is where section 1 appears. Looking at the actual document itself, I find it interesting, and this is what we call a fair copy that we have in the Revelation book. But yes, it was written down by Sidney Rigdon. It was not written down by Sidney Rigdon in this volume. In this volume, I believe, and let me just double check my work here. So in this volume, it's not written by Sidney Rigdon, but rather by Oliver Cowdery and John Whitmer. That's how the Revelation was received. Very little changes here. It looks like some spelling errors, some things that are maybe unknown and blotted out. But yeah, a pretty clean copy, all things considered. And that is what was used to publish not only the Book of Commandments and the Doctrine and Covenants, but also a periodical called the Evening and Morning Star, which you can see in Revelations and Translations, Volume 2. So that being said, not going to get too much into the actual details of the section itself. It is, again, a preface. It's explaining what the church is, what the revelations are, a couple of warnings. It is written in the voice of the Lord. And so that's what we get from a little bit of the rest of the story about section 1, about the Book of Commandments, about the Book of Doctrine and Covenants, and about the Revelation books, about the Evening and Morning Star. So hopefully that's helped to sort of fill in some of your knowledge about the beginnings of Latter-day Saint revelations outside of the Book of Mormon, as well as about how the church originally published and some of the problems that they had with that. So thank you once again for joining me on this little trip through section 1 of the Doctrine and Covenants. I hope you join me again soon. We're going to be going into some further history of the church, as well as some other sections of the Doctrine and Covenants, and see what things we can mine out of the Joseph Smith papers. So thank you for joining me. Until next time, we'll see you then. Thanks.